The twilight sky sank deeper and deeper to the abyssal night as light's last rays vanished behind the looming peak of the snow-capped mountains in the far distance. A rolling wave of grey cloud passed through the peaks just as the sun descended, and it coated the rocky giants with glossy black shadow which stabbed through the mist. It was a ghastly, yet fascinating sight for the villagers of Rornan's crossing. The once beautiful mountains now stood ethereal sentinels gazing down upon the villagers like a hawk does its prey. Haunting, yet oddly beautiful. It stood as the icon for the small village, which too was beautiful, yet oddly haunting. It seemed as though some strange cloud of fear had befallen the town and warped all life within its confines. The once vibrant green grass of the plains had bled their green hues, leaving behind a yellow similar to that of rotting skin. The once tall and proud oak trees had withered and turned gnarled, their leaves falling to the ground beneath and never blooming again. Even the people showed signs of this darkness. Deep purple bags hung beneath their dull, unlit eyes, and their backs remained hunched as they scampered through their days like rodents. All acts they committed were born of necessity. The freedom of life did not exist here, but instead the shackles of prison seemed to have enslaved their souls into a state of living damnation. I have never seen something so living and yet so dead before, and to merely gaze at these shambling corpses sent a cold shiver down my spine. Then again, I should not be the one to judge. After all, the peculiar affliction which plagues my mind has sent more than its fair share of fear down the spines of great men. Who am I, a heretic of righteousness and morality, and a master of chaos and perversion, to judge man from monster? No, that job belongs to those who in their arrogance decided that their way of life was the best way to live, not to a peculiarity such as myself. 100 set of eyes shot my way as I crossed into town, going wide with a paralyzing fear as they saw the full midnight black-cloaked me, standing a silhouette against the blood-red sky cross into their plagued homes. I nearly smiled at my effect, and for a moment pondered removing the large hood and black full helmet from my head to show them the inhuman creation that lay beneath. An angular, ebony-grey face with hair as white as fresh snow, and lapis-blue eyes, cracked by tendrils of an icy blue. Oh, the horror that would have adorned their faces. Sadly, the matter of coin was far more pressing than matters of enjoyment and pleasure right now, and so with a heavy sigh I sauntered into town square, sending peasants into shadowed alleys and houses which seemed on the verge of collapsing. A rat's nest for a rodent. How perfect, I mused to myself, as I lumbered up the mossy stone stairs and threw open the doors of the Soaring Dragon, the best and only inn located in Rornan's Crossing. If there was a state of sound more quiet and terrifying than silence itself, the non-existent noise of the tavern would have exceeded well beyond that state, as the door slammed open and shut behind me. My footfalls resounded like the roar of thunder as I moved towards the empty bar and to the unconscious dwarf behind it. The loudness of my step, unsurprisingly, did not waken, for how could the subconscious, which had grown so accustomed to the roaring of one's heart and the songs of voice and laughter, awaken to something as common as loudness? I gently grabbed the back of his red hair and pulled his face upwards so that his closed eyes faced my now shadowed ones. My finger then descended ever slowly onto the bell, which let out a quiet, yet high, shrill note that sent the poor dwarf spiraling out of the blissful state of slumber and into the blackened abyss of my cloaked eyes. It's funny how quietness arouses the subconscious, how it can detect that it is not hearing something, and thus ignite a spark of curiosity and fear that sends one back into the gloom state of reality. It was terrifying to not be able to hear something, and as such, we must hear what we did not hear to satiate this spark. It was a trick of terror I had learned long ago, though the teacher himself now remains lost in the fragmented chaos of my thoughts. He stared into the abyssal shadow of my hood with the expected reaction, and from the way his body began to shake and the cold sweat that poured from his brow, I knew that I had enslaved his mind and made it a puppet of my will. He would do anything to escape my gaze, and yet no matter how many times he pleased me, he would never find solace. Pain is a necessity. To allow one to escape from it is a sin of the highest order. I heard the cry. I whispered into his ear as he took a large gulp of air. "Tell me everything you know," I commanded as I sat down on a stool, clutching his hair tighter as he attempted to pull away. I will do, sir, he stuttered, taking another large gulp of air. It started about a month ago. A massive storm rolled into the mountains, large and black like an army of hell itself. Thunder roared like demons, lightning ripped through the sky like a dragon does the flesh of man. Rain fell like a torrent of arrows, smashing through the roofs of some houses and sweeping away the homes of those living on the lower steps. It was during the pinnacle of the storm when a caravan arrived. They had the shit beaten out of him and were hurting badly. I didn't have any room left here, so I sent him to Father Kane's house. Kane's church over there, he said, pointing out the window and towards a destroyed church about a mile away. Moss had begun to creep upon the sides of the destroyed bell tower, and from the way the solid stone walls were shaped, it looked like a fire had melted the place away. As dawn's first rays broke through, we began to smell the burning. A few of the braver souls rushed out to see what had happened, and they came piling back in, screaming the church was alight. We all bolted out and watched the thing be devoured by flames. Even with the thunder and rain, I swear I could still hear the screaming. Aye, it was horrid. Began as a cacophony of horror, and then began to crack and blister like embers do from a flame. There was nothing we could do but listen to them and be thankful it wasn't us inside. It was then that a black sort of wave shot forth from the church. I heard gloomy darkness from there, before waking in my bed, feeling as though my soul had been torn asunder from my chest. He gulped as he continued to stare into the blackness of my eyes. That's all I know, sir, I swear. Please, just don't hurt me. He whimpered. I let go of his hair and slammed a coin down onto the bar, before walking outside without a word. I could have sworn I heard him crying as the door closed behind me. I had broken him. I knew I was going to before I'd even entered the tavern. I wouldn't be surprised to find him swinging from a noose when I got back. Then again, what did I care? Wasn't I doing an act of good by helping this town? Who cares if the job is done by the perceived immoral so long as the job is done? I smirked underneath the masks I wore and began walking toward the church. The cobbled path that led there was stained with Sky's tears and their already odd colour. It appeared as though the path itself was bleeding, a trail of blood to lead toward a bloody end. But whether it be my end or the end of whatever the hell awaited within the church did not matter to me. For in death there is solace, while in life there was only the metaphoric game. Either way, to discover and play one aspect or the other provided me with a win-win situation. My favourite. The yellow grass swayed in the frigid autumnal breeze, giving the illusory visage of undead hands reaching from their graves in a last-ditch attempt of reaching the afterlife. Whether or not they realized the hopelessness and futility of their situation would remain known to only them, though perhaps the curse that had been placed upon the villagers had enlightened them as to what the undead felt. Maybe I should break another for that answer. The illusory hands continued to claw at my boots as I wandered onward, listening to the cawing of crows and ravens as they hovered about the sky, starved and waiting for another man to fall to the ground so they could begin their feast. Their carry-on aspect was disgusting, yet oddly admirable. The ruthlessness and patience that one must have to live that lifestyle was tremendous, arguably unattainable by no mortal. The bell tower loomed above me, clouding me with its long spear-like shadow. The place reeked of death and ash like the sullen fields of war. It's funny when you think about it, how a building designed to be a bastion of light is so easily converted to be an abomination of shadow, and thus near impossible to revert. It was as though it defied the laws of the universe to have something built to be either solely good or evil. There must always be a mix of the two, it seemed. Had I not been born of the blood I would have undoubtedly gone insane at the sight I was greeted with upon stepping through the bell tower and into the sermon chamber. Even to me the sight was gruesome, and a sickening feeling began to arise within my gut. Not at the gore itself, but at the artistic perfection that the sight had been created with. Everything was perfect, almost as though some dark divine had crawled its way through the 9 hells and blessed our world with this effigy of darkness. Whoever I needed to kill was obviously a skilled swordsman and surgeon. A fun combination, I mused. Before me, upon these now hollowed grounds, rested a pentagram constructed of the human innards. The large, white, five-pointed star, surrounded by a continued white circle, was constructed of various bones that linked together in perfect harmony. It was built wide enough, too, so that the spaces between the star and circle, which were filled with blood and gore, did not overshadow the satanic symbol. The skull rested at each intersection and each peak, facing outwards as though daring anyone who approached it to try and defile this monument of darkness. The most horrifying sight was what rested atop the effigy, however. A corpse who lay completely naked. His skin was grey and withered, stretched as though the very moisture of his skin had been drained. What was worse, however, was the slow rising and falling of his stomach. I walked towards the man, silently observing him and watching as his vibrant brown eyes followed me. He was fully alive. He could feel everything. His body began to shudder as he coughed and sent out a swarm of flies, with which incalculable speed dived back down his throat and squirmed beneath his skin, devouring muscle and organ. I could see them, wriggling and feasting beneath his paper-thin skin. I have no idea how he summoned the strength and ability to speak, but he did. "Please, help me," he whispered. His voice was as raspy and dry as his skin. I was more than happy to oblige. His ears twitched as the sound of steel upon leather shredded through the air. The blade was an angelic white with a red blood groove running down the center. The crossguard protruded from the mouths of two open faces that bisected the blade and formed the handle, which was as black as the devil's soul. The pommel was a small white claw which held a red ruby in its grasp. I watched the man's eyes open in terror as he realized what was about to happen, and then shut them out of determination and fear. The organs squished beneath my feet as I walked towards him, causing a wet slopping noise to echo throughout the remnants of the church. I stood above him now, blade poking gently into his sternum and above his heart, taunting him, no, daring him, to say the two words that would end his life. "Do it," he murmured. I plunged the blade into his body without hesitation, watching his body convulse and then snap together and go rigid. He had danced with Lady Death and been unable to keep up. What a blessing that was. The blade withdrew from his corpse, and without a sound, as I turned around and stepped off the effigy, stalking towards the altar that sat raised above the effigy and the now burned benches. It looked solid, constructed of a white stone and partially covered by a scorched and tattered red cloth with golden inlay. The thing was so defiled that the religion which once resided in this church was indiscernible. Sadly, with a solid kick, the altar shattered, revealing a trapdoor beneath. It was the common construction of all churches within the light-forged republic. How I knew this? Well, that's a story for when I'm feeling particularly sadistic. I entered into what was supposed to be the treasure room, only to find the room devoid of gold, but filled to the brim with glass and multicolored liquids. Ancient, archaic, and likely heretical scrawling adorned the walls, which were illuminated by large melting candles. On the far north wall, a woman hung suspended by chains. Spittle drooled from her open mouth, and her eyes had rolled up into her head. Tubes had torn into her appendages and torso, likely pumping in some sort of foreign liquid. Her skin was contorted, large lumps protruded from the fair skin, and most of her once slim figure now seemed bloated. Stretch marks had formed all over her body, and in some places there were even tears. I went up to one of the lumps and stabbed my finger into it, releasing a strange mixture of water and blood. I actually laughed. Now that was a creative method of killing. The murderer had drained the moisture of the other victims of the caravans and left them to rot at probably various points throughout the field, hence the appearance of the crows and ravens. But he had somehow managed to preserve the water he had drained from the bodies and now pump it into this woman. He had internally drowned her. Very creative. I might just have to steal that idea. The trapdoor slammed shut behind me, and a haunting voice sang through the air, followed by a chorus of steel upon leather. "What are you doing here upon these sacred grounds?" it spat, pointing its blade towards me. I turned to face him and smiled beneath my masked face. "Did you do this?" I asked politely. "'Cause I really must say that this is an ingenious way of killing multiple people. My commendations, dear sir," I said jovially as I unsheathed my own blade. "You know, I would propose joining you if there was coin to it," I asked seriously as I let my blade fall limp at my side. "Servants of the Ascended Ones have no need for coin. They will provide for us," he answered as he charged forth. "Wrong answer!" I screamed as I hefted my own blade and rushed. Our blades clashed together, sending sparks shooting outwards as we began the deadly dance. His blade was almost as sharp as his wit, which was to say, dull. It seemed to almost slow as it cut through the air before coming to a crashing explosion as it smashed everything in its vicinity. He himself, however, was eloquent, using the explosive momentum to carry him into a series of subsequent attacks that shook the cellar with a crashing blow. Where he was eloquent and powerful, I was even more so. My blade slashed through the air with an unparalleled beauty. The air parted for my blade, making every strike swift and clear. It gleamed in these shadowed rooms as though a tear in heaven had opened here. Sparks shot as the blades collided, their silky smooth surfaces sliding over one another. The man took a sharp intake of breath as my blade bit into his abdomen. His body began to pulse as it drank in his blood. His eyes began to droop, and he morphed from man to a puddle of flesh before my eyes. "It doesn't matter," he cried in agony as the blade drank him. "The curse is forever. You cannot save them." He laughed maniacally as the oblivion claimed him. I laughed in return. Little did he know how wrong he was. You see, I always get jobs done, and this one stated freedom from curse. And there was one freedom still obtainable to them, I thought to myself as I headed back to town. Many years have passed since that day, and no recounts of those events circulate in the cesspit of human legend and rumor. However, if one were to compare the more modern maps to those of older days, they would notice that a small town named Rornan's Crossing has had a name change. Devil's Crossing, they now called it, after the villagers who once lived there had vanished without a trace. And a lonely inn sits in this town, which once dubbed the Roaring Dragon, now bears the name of the Swinging Dwarf.